But now I think it's an opportunity for us to escape a little bit and dive into the world of art and ideas. And I'm very excited for this conversation about video games. Today, it's going to be a little bit of an unusual format because we won't actually have time for audience questions. Hans is a famously busy curator, and his time is short. He's got to run off right after the conversation. But I can assure you that next week we'll have the protopian futurist Monica Bilietsky on the show, and there will be time for questions. But in the spirit of speeding along, let's dive in. So thank you very much for coming on Art World, Hans.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you so much, Josh. Thank you all for joining, and hi, everyone.
So on the show, we have a lot of listeners from the art world, but we also have a lot of listeners from the tech world who may not be as familiar with what the Serpentine is and how it functions. And I wonder if you could start just by explaining how does the Serpentine work and how is it different from your typical collecting museum?
Yeah, the Serpentine is in Kensington Garden in London. It's two galleries, the North and the South Gallery, actually connected with a bridge. And the mission is really to build connections, new connections between artists and society, bringing in also, of course, technology, local and international communities, and having strong connections to ecology. We work with art, architecture, and design. And besides our exhibition program, we also have an architectural program where every summer we have a pavilion that started in 2000 with Zaha Hadid. So it's very special this year because it's 25 years ago that with Zaha this pavilion program started, and she also gave us the motto not only for the pavilion but I think for all the activities, which is Zaha Hadid said, there should be no end to experimentation. And of course, today, because of also the topic of your podcast, the focus is, I think, more on technology. So it's interesting if you think about Zaha's idea of experimentation and technology, that brings us, of course, to Billy Kluver and the experiments in art and technology. And in a way, what you're trying to do with technology is new experiments in art and technology for the 21st century.
I think it's just remarkable how intersectional you've built the Serpentine into being, that it really is something that is at this kind of crossroads of so many different forms of creativity and innovation. And I think when you compare it to other museums, about a decade ago, when there were a lot of established museums that were just starting to grudgingly port themselves onto the internet, building out their websites, building out, the rudimentary tech departments, you actually established an internal skunk works at the Serpentine called Serpentine Arts Technologies. And I wonder what inspired you to have this kind of autonomous, semi-autonomous tech incubator within the museum, and how did you think about giving it a mandate from the beginning?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It began probably 12, 13 years ago when the first meeting happened with Ben Vickers, the amazing artist and technologist who had already, as an artist, experiences to work with public institutions. He had worked with universities and had reflected on how technology could be actually brought into the context of universities and education. And so we had an amazing conversation with Ben about how one could actually do the same with museums and basically go, because at that time most of the things in relation to tech just happened on the website, and the question was, how could one go beyond that? How could one actually really think about for the 21st century about the team? And Ben, of course, built up a team, and we have today an amazing tech team with several curators. Kay Watson is the head of art and technology, and Eva Jäger, Tamar Clark-Brown, Lee Trin, Victoria Ivanova, Ruth Waters, Tom Introna, are this great team. And for Bettina Korek, I was here, and for myself, it's really a great priority that we can go into exhibition spaces with technology, that we can go into society also with technology, but also that we can actually, with and thanks to our team, create, help to create infrastructure, not only for the Serpentine, but also for the sector. We hope that what we do with technology is useful also for other institutions who maybe don't have a tech department, or don't have that kind of infrastructure. So for that reason, a lot of it is also open source. We have the reports which one can download. So in a way, it's an activity which hopefully goes beyond the Serpentine into the world.
And I think the one thing that makes you incredibly well positioned as an institution is that if you look in like the kind of the broader tech, ecosystem, 10 years is the amount of time that it takes to really um, inculcate a major shift within a tech company. I mean, you look at Google, 10 years ago, they were just starting to really make a major investment into AI, and you see how, where that's gotten them today. So the fact that you have this 10-year head start on what seems to be this really major paradigm shift that is starting to accelerate is is just a model of prescience. And I think to go back to the beginning, as an example of this prescience, can you talk a little bit about Cecile B. Evans's Agnes project that I think was one of the earliest projects?
Yeah, that was the very first project actually in 2014, which exactly 10 years ago, which basically we produced. And it's an AI chat box, basically chatbot, who is still living on the Serpentine website. So the artist Cecil B. Evans created this as a commission. And it's basically not necessarily, as a bot realizing administrative tasks, but it's more a storyteller. It's more maybe also a guide. The project is more a guide, a companion, to the Serpentine world. And so I would say that the more kind of you engage with it, the further it kind of accompanies you. And one thing which was really fascinating is that, and that was somehow a real revelation when we did this project, is that we do exhibitions, we do public programs, we do pavilions, we do also public sculpture in the park, because we're in a park, so the idea of art for all, that it's accessible for everyone, is very important. But all of these things have a beginning and an end, because they basically last a month or 2 months or 3 months. And we suddenly realized with this commission with Agnes that the project is actually a living organism, that it's no longer having a beginning and an end, that it evolves. And I think that is something which over the last 10 years has really become really important in the art world, that more and more artists are interested today in working with artworks, with exhibitions also, and artworks which are living organisms with feedback loops, which evolve, which change. So in that way, that the artwork is no longer a finite category, it has no longer a beginning or an end, and that's it continued then soon after with Ian Chang. Bad Corgi is a kind of a kind of, Ian called it a shadowy mindfulness app, to kind of contemplate chaos. It's a corgi, very stubborn corgi, and has of course lots of connections there also to gaming. The gaming thing was already there. It became kind of almost like a game. And these two first projects happened on the website. So it was before we then brought it, into the exhibition space and into the park.
So interesting. I think I want to return to the idea of like these durational artworks that exist kind of as organisms when we get to the video game part. But I think it's also, this Agnes project was obviously a foreshadowing of last year when you declared it to be the year of AI at the Serpentine. And you had dozens of conferences and workshops and conversations around how AI is starting to impact this like artistic sphere and the art ecosystem, everything from um, the threat to copyright and ownership, and also just like the kind of the growing specter of certain forms of human-made art being potentially outmoded. And this is kind of, there's an alarmist tendency that is focusing on what could be lost. But I think that you have also a kind of a profound optimism about what could be gained. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what some of the key findings were from this year of AI and what you were surprised by and what you learned yourself.
Yeah, we basically did two exhibitions. One had to do with images and AI, with the huge data set, the nature system of, Refik Anadol, and then basically the second one, which is still ongoing, is with Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst, which is with choirs and sound. We could probably talk about that later. And then, of course, also the future art ecosystem, which is basically the fourth in a series of booklets which one can download from our website. What I meant before, it's open source, it's accessible for everyone, where we really, wanted to look into kind of key questions in relation to artists working with AI. And no worries, because somebody's worried here that we're not going to talk about video games. We are getting there, video games, because this year, 25, will be, video game will play a very important role. So we're going to get there. But it's just, I think before that, maybe interesting to talk about, as you wanted to talk about these AI projects. I think in a way, the future art ecosystem addresses many questions. And then, of course, the projects we do, make it possible for visitors to kind of experience, because very often, Paul Klee said, was one of the first artists, being Swiss, I came across as a teenager, was Paul Klee. And he said that art can make the invisible visible. No? And I think there is a lot about AI, which is invisible. And I think it's very fascinating how today, artists are working with making that invisible visible. And that can happen through, through exhibitions. Surprising, because you asked about the surprising thing, was certainly the experience with Alexandra Daisy Ginsburg. Because when we worked with Alexandra Daisy Ginsburg, who is an artist and a designer, we basically were thinking about a project, and Alexandra said that she's interested in doing a garden, in doing actually a more longer durational project. And that's something we observe a lot now, that actually artists are interested to go beyond the time horizon of an exhibition. They're interested more in, in long durational projects. And she worked actually with a pollinator project. It's a pollinator garden. So it's a garden not basically foremost for humans, but it's actually, it's called Pollinator Pathmaker. It's an artwork not about pollinators, but for pollinators. It's a living organism. It's a living sculpture made out of plants. 11 beds. It's the biggest, piece we've ever done in Kensington Gardens. It was kind of 11 beds on the North Flower Walk. The algorithm the artists used actually created a plant design which, supported a maximum number of pollinators. So often, on the verge of extinction, these pollinators could basically use this garden. And AI, the way how AI, it was very surprising to us how AI actually helped the artists to realize this pollinator gardens. And it was really very much a mixed reality project, because it was an AI project. It was about AI, helping to basically find the planting scheme, finding the algorithm. The garden, could be enjoyed also by visitors from all over the world, but it was foremost there for the pollinators and stayed there for 2 years.
So I think the touching on AI ahead of the video game conversation is very interesting, in part because this durational artwork that you're talking about, that's more of an organism, that's more that behaves more yeah, like a living thing, really is, it hinges upon the use of AI as an automation mechanism to make it live outside of the the purview of its creator. And the flip side of that, of course, is that the data that is needed to fuel these kinds of AI models comes from artists. And this was one of the most interesting things about the call, the current work by Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst, that is it was really built out of a number of recordings that they made with these choirs all over the UK, I think 15 different choirs. They took the data from these recordings and they mixed them, gave them to an algorithm. The algorithm is mixing them in continually recombinant kinds of arrangements, and that's what's being played in the show. But that on the back end of this, they have created a whole data trust to store the information that they acquired from the choirs, so that they would be there'd be actual ongoing forms of ownership. And could you just touch a little bit on how that data trust works and how you're thinking about the model side of these kinds of ongoing generative projects.
Yeah, we've been talking, and I think that's also very much part of these 10 years. You mentioned that it's not a sprint. The whole thing, is very much a marathon. And that means also that we've been talking to artists for many, many years. So the dialogue with, Holly and Matt has been actually going on for, I would say, 7, 8 years. The first time we met them was in connection of a research with Ben Vickers at the time about algo raves and how actually blockchain and raves are together. So that's how we met. Then through Matt, also Holly. And so we've been talking with them for, I would say, 5, 6 years. And the exhibition is curated by Eva Jäger, who worked very intensely with, Holly and Matt over the last 2 years on this idea that basically the creation of the data set, the training of the model, and then also the output would all be the work. So it's not only the output which is the work, but the creation of the data and also the training of the model is as much, part of the work. And for that reason, the artist wanted, and of course, because of our, tech department, we can produce such works in-house. And that means, it's of course with a lot of partners, but and we worked also with SAP on the design. Holly and Matt worked very closely with them. And the idea was actually to collectively train an AI model so that people can interact with the model and can also see something one usually doesn't see when one interacts with AI, which is actually the insight into how the model is put together, no? Again, to make the invisible visible, to go back to Park Clay. And so in a way, importantly also is, of course, that not only that the data are ethically sourced, that is something which already played a big role in the Refik Anadol show earlier in the year, when we worked with Refik, who of course was also in your show. We basically talked a lot about the ethical sourcing of the data. And here there is also the idea that not only is the data ethically sourced, but also people who contribute actually to the model can govern and have a certain degree of, I don't know how one would say in English, determination, maybe. They can have a determination over their data moving into the future. So what happened, to describe it very simply, is that for many months, the artists and our teams have been training a choral AI model. So they basically collaborated with 15 choirs all over the UK. It's kind of an archipelago, and then through that, creating a training protocol, as Holly and Matt say, to capture, these voices accurately. And so the audio is captured, through a multi-channel, and the artists then create many, many mixes, from these channels and create basically more data for an even more high fidelity mode. So at the center of it all is a songbook. And that songbook, which was used by the choirs, which was used for the data set, can also be used by other people to train their own models. So that means, it's like Holly Plus in that sense, Holly Plus, Holly Herndon's previous project, that really people can, use it to train their own model. And in a way, I think the project is about thinking on a very sort of broad scope about, the necessity to train an AI model. And I think it's fascinating right now, it's not only Holly and Matt, many artists right now are working on their own AI model, and it creates also a certain independence. And of course, this idea of the protocol is key, because if there is a protocol, it can also be picked up by others. And there is an interesting thing there, I think, of a new kind of, protocol art. So we can say this exhibition is kind of maybe part of that. And of course, through the data trust, there is this, in a way, idea of co-ownership.
It's so fascinating because, of course, like art history kind of prefigured this in many ways, during the conceptual art kind of movement, including with like, Sol LeWitt's art, where the artwork is kind of, it's not necessarily the artwork that you see, but it's actually the instructions to create it. And so these kinds of the rules behind how these models operate and the way that they intake their data is kind of this next generation of, kind of Sol LeWitt style mechanization of the artwork. And I think that's so interesting when you go into the video game context, because when we had Google DeepMind's Matt Lorraine on the show a few 2 months ago, he was talking about how AI is kind of like creating the opportunity for a 10x creative, who's like the idea of the 10x engineer, who's so much more capable than any individual human creator has been in the past by marshaling all of these kinds of new digital tools. And he said that the obvious kind of format for this kind of 10x artist to work in is world building, and that just so happens to be the name of the 2022 show that you curated at the Julia Stoschek collection in Dusseldorf about video games. And I wonder, can you talk a little bit about what was it that really like fixed your attention, that made you realize that video games were a really interesting area for curatorial work?
Yeah, in a way, my practice has always been about studio visits, and I would say everything, comes out of dialogues with artists, out of conversations. It's kind of like uh, an infinite conversation I have with artists since I'm a teenager. I started when I was 16, 17 to go to studios by night train all over Europe, and that has not stopped really. And so studio visits, are always the point of departure. And at a certain moment, I I basically realized that more and more artists I visited were either working on a video game or were interested in doing a video game. Because I always also ask artists about their unrealized project, because I think it's interesting. We know a great deal about architects' unrealized projects because they publish them, but we know almost nothing about artists' unrealized projects. So I always ask them that question, and what is a project they would love to do in the context of the art world, which they can't do right now. And so many artists said they would like to do a video game. So I thought, in a way, and of course, also in the Serpentine context, we've been for a long time discussing this, the importance of video games as world building. And it seemed when the invitation came from Julia to actually curate this anniversary exhibition and also have the building in Düsseldorf for 18 months, it's also that sort of idea that it could evolve over 18 months so that we wouldn't do it, because it seemed interesting to me also this idea, because a video game is again not a finite thing. It keeps evolving, it keeps changing. Even AAA games, when they're launched, it's not like a feature film, because once the feature film is launched, it's usually not changing anymore. Unless something happens and it got to be edited. But with video games, it's a permanent feedback loop. And so I've always been interested in doing exhibitions which are living organisms, because you mentioned Sol Levitt. I did a show in the 90s called Do It, which is basically instruction art and recipes, fluxus, conceptual art from all continents, and there have been more than 500 artists, and the show has never stopped since 1993, 2, 3. So for 31 years, there's always been someone doing one of these do-it versions. So in a way, that was almost like an analog algorithm as an exhibition. And so I thought, it would be interesting to do a video game exhibition which would evolve and change. And we started to see that there are different ways how artists engage with video games. On the one hand, there is artists who actually used existing video games and would basically make a détournement, turn them into something else. Jody are a great example for that, but also, of course, Sturtevant early on, did that. And the second example would be artists who actually would go into extremely popular video games and do a project there, which is seen by many, many millions of people. So this idea of almost infiltrating that context. And then the third possibility would be, which is the most frequent one, that basically artists would create their own video games. And that's, of course, with the bigger accessibility of the gaming engines become more and more frequent because it's much easier and much more accessible. What we also realized during the exhibition research, and I think that's always so fascinating, is that is not only to show a trend or show something a lot of younger artists are working on at the moment, but to also look back and see who have been the pioneers of that, and we basically made a lot of studio visits with artists like Rebecca Allen, who has been not only the teacher of artists, many artists who work with video games, but has herself actually worked on video games very early on when the game engines weren't easily accessible. You had to build these game engines. And so in a way, the exhibition brought all of this together, and it's still evolving and touring. It then, after 18 months, it also went to the Pompidou in Metz. And I would say this idea of world building has, of course, also to do with kind of understanding what the world is, as Ian Cheng told me, because now more than ever, the dream is to be able to possess the agency to kind of create new worlds, not just to inherit, or live within existing ones. And then, of course, the idea is also that we hope that many of the unrealized, games of artists can be realized over time. And I would say also the idea of people spending time is interesting, because, I realized that actually one spends, I spend a lot of time with Elden Ring during the research of the exhibition. And I realized that, one can actually spend hundreds of hours with a video game. And that also happened with the exhibition. People spend many, many hours in the show. And so it's sort of bound the visitors to the exhibition. And of course, it also creates, new audiences. We then did at the Serpentine, soon after, the project with Cars, and also the one with Gabriel Massan. The one with Cars was the example of going into an existing video game. And then the one with Gabriel Massan was the one about actually creating a new video game.
It's so interesting how you, like when you talk about the time that you can spend in a video game versus the time that you spend maybe looking at a painting, maybe, 15 to 30 seconds looking at a painting versus hours and hours of engagement that you can have with a video game. It kind of reorients certain metrics that are in play. And the same thing goes for the infiltration that you were talking about, like when you worked with Fortnite to bring a virtual pavilion from your Cause exhibition in 2022 into the game world, and I believe that it actually it drew 150 million virtual visits to the show. And I'm not sure what your annual attendance is in person, but I have a feeling it's probably not 150 million people. So that must have been an interesting proof of concept. And I wonder what did that kind of like, what did that get you to think that you were onto, or what was your realization after that kind of success?
I think we also think a lot, at the Serpentine about collaborating kind of with different organizations, not only to collaborate with other museums, which is something we or with other arts organizations, which is something we anyway do always, but also to create or foster, new alliances in a way, with tech companies, or in this instance, as you say, with Fortnite, with a gaming company, and also with Acute. And basically, the exhibition of Cars New Fiction happened at the Serpentine, and then it happened at the same time on the landing page of Fortnite, which means, as you said, that over the 2 weeks, it was actually on the landing page, 152 million visitors visited it, and that resulted in us having a totally new audience in the gallery. The physical exhibition was visited by so many, young people, and actually, usually it's the other way around. Parents who bring their teenage children to the museum. Here it was the other way around. The teenagers brought the parents, to the Serpentine, and in a way, it really created a whole new dialogue, and that happened again with Gabriel Massan, because the third world, the bottom dimension, was the game of Gabriel Massan, where we basically wanted to do exactly that unrealized project becoming realized. No, that's the idea. It's not about, when we talk about unrealized projects, it's about enabling artists. I think the aim is always to help artists to realize their dream. That's kind of our job. And Gabriel wanted to do a game to basically understand our actions in the world, as they told us, through the lens of decoloniality, queer theories, and also decentralized strategies in technology, and also in economics and in philosophy. And kind of, to summarize it, the game would be a sort of a portal, no? Which is anyway, I think, interesting that very often in world building, games can be portal, and they wanted it to be a portal for us to enter a state of radical imagination. What we realized there is also the extremely collaborative nature of video games, because we invited Gabriel Massan to do a personal exhibition, a one-person show, but actually it became a very interdisciplinary collaboration with many Brazilian artists, Castillo Vitorino Brasileiro, Jota Mombassa, Ventura Profana, but also with producers, music producers like Lisa, with technologists, with Novissimo Edka. And so in a way, the exhibition was also a mixed reality experience, because of course, and I think that was true also, and is true for the world building exhibition. I think why would one exhibit in a museum a video game if one can play it at home? No, I mean, it's basically that would be pointless. So the exhibition needs to give us an experience. Dominic Gonzalez Foster always said an exhibition needs to be an extraordinary experience. So hopefully, it gives us an extraordinary experience we can't make alone in front of the computer, or in front of the console, or on our mobile phone, or it's a different experience, and that means it's a physical installation as world building, which at the same time is a game. Also, visitors could actually, it was a collaboration with Tezos. So here again, it's a new alliance. It was basically Serpentine and Tezos collaborating, and visitors could download at the end basically an NFT, and so instead of a postcard, as a memory of their show, they could have for free, because the Serpentine has free admission, which is very important to us. It's all our exhibitions are free, so we also wanted this to be free, and so every visitor could take this souvenir and have an NFT.
So in the spectrum of contemporary art, I don't think you can get more mainstream than a cause exhibition on Fortnite. That's like almost like the equivalent of Beyonce at the Super Bowl. But then on the other end of the spectrum, Gabriel Massan's Third World, the Bottom Dimension, was an exploration of the Black gay Brazilian experience in the wake of colonialism, which is a much more, as you said, like a kind of a personal lens into into an experience that maybe not everybody who goes to the Serpentine is familiar with. And I wondered, what did you learn from the process of creating that game? Because not only did you exhibit it, you also produced it, and you brought together a team of some 40 people across technologists, game designers, I think theorists, to work on this very collaborative, but also quite heavy lift kind of project.
Yeah, I mean, there were so many dimensions to it. There's, of course, this idea, there's also a strong ecological dimension, to be in communion with the environment and not in separation with the environment. I would say what was also very fascinating is that we had visitors who actually engaged in a very radical participatory way with the game and wouldn't want to leave anymore, and would basically play the game in the exhibition installation. And then we would have many, many visitors who would actually watch the players play. This idea what happens online as well, that actually some people play and other people watch, people play. And that happened also in the physical space. Some people watched people play for, a very long time, I would say. Also, the idea that a solo exhibition can become a group show was very fascinating to see. We have that now again, because in 25 we're going to have Daniel Braithwaite Shirley, and that will be again, very much it's an invitation to the artists to do a new game, and we become again a very collaborative, practice. And I would say the other thing which was super interesting is that actually one visitor to the exhibition was Madonna, and Madonna was so inspired by Gabriel's game and spent time with it that she invited Gabriel to join the tour. And so all of a sudden, the game, which was also seen by many people, of course, in the park, all of a sudden was seen by millions of people, through Madonna's tour. So here again, it translated and created, I think, this idea of, creating and bringing many different worlds together is also something which is very much at the core of what I think we want to do. And it's also something which does happen with video games, because it not only brings many different people together, it also brings disciplines together. I mean, there is animation is involved, storytelling is involved, literature is involved, music is involved. And it was a very multi-sensory experience in that sense, which really binds the visitor to the show. So people weren't just kind of like popping in, and popping out.
One thing that this puts me in mind of is that when you have the museum working as a producer for this very complicated, very ambitious kind of project that is ongoing, that has a life beyond just the scope of the exhibition itself, it reminds me of the Dia Art Foundation and land art and the idea of having a museum that is funding these very ambitious incursions into the ongoing kind of physical environment, the natural environment. And here it's something similar almost in the digital world where you're creating something that has this ongoing kind of participatory experience. And as you start to embark on this year of video games, um, how are you thinking about the role of the institution, the role of the museum starting to shift with these new kinds of needs emerging?
Yeah, I think it's important, of course, that institutions can help produce, these realities and bring them into the world, which is what we are trying to do. I think the idea also of, I mean, we spoke about it when we chatted last week, this idea of the longue durée. I think it's interesting right now that a lot of artists are interested in long durational projects and projects which go beyond the time frame, of an exhibition. And that can be a video game, which sometimes takes years to make and then continues to evolve. But it's not only in the digital realm, it also happens in the physical realm. Many artists, we had Alexander Daisy Ginsberg with the garden. We worked last year with Inka Shonibare, who now started a farming and residency project in Nigeria, and basically is interested in this idea of an artist farm. Same with Ottobon Nekanga, with Adrian Villarojas. Many artists are working on that. So the idea that artists are working no longer sort of on event culture or things which are related only to events or exhibitions, but are kind of working on such longer duration dimension. I think, we always, because you mentioned Dia, of course, it was very fascinating when the generation in the 60s of artists, land art and other new art forms, was kind of, an expanded notion of art. So that sort of, meant that a different kind of institution needed to be invented. And I think that's true also for our time. And this is why I think we need not only exhibitions showing that, but we need new departments, no? So, and that's why at the Serpentine, we created this department for tech. We also have a department for ecology. And we believe, in the future there will be different, new departments. We need to kind of think about reinventing the institution in that sense for the 21st century. And I think at the same time, it's important also that that doesn't mean it's not because new forms are invented that old forms of art disappear. That continues to be amazing work in painting, in drawing, in sculpture, amazing work in video. And all of these are, in a way, parallel realities. And that's also why we have in our exhibition program, we have different sort of, I would say, recurrent typologies, of exhibitions. We would have, for example, once a year, a series which we call Protest Against Forgetting, which is a pioneering artist who hasn't had the visibility the artist sort of deserves or should have, where the exhibition sort of basically creates, in that sense, a visibility for an artist, who has worked for many, many decades. At the same time, we have every year an emerging artist with their first kind of bigger solo show. That's what we discussed, for example, with Gabrielle, and then, or now with Daniel Braithwaite-Shirley. At the same time, we also have, as part of that series, sometimes very, very well-known artists who have exhibited a lot, but with a totally unexpected, more interdisciplinary aspect. So we're going to have a show with Peter Doig, which will focus actually on Peter Doig's relationship to music for the first time, and to sound. And I think what is also maybe to be mentioned is that with these shows, which are not necessarily tech shows, We also, of course, try to bring in then, an element of technology. So to give you two examples for that, this year it's no longer next year, we are already in 2025. So this year we're going to have in spring Arpita Singh. Arpita Singh is a pioneering artist based in Delhi whom we followed for many, many years, who is basically drawing on Indian miniatures and narratives, which are very much interwoven also with, social issues. An amazing, amazing painter who has also been developing her work through notebooks. And she's in her late 80s, so that's an exhibition we can say, where an artist who needs more visibility will finally have a retrospective. It will be her first retrospective outside India. And we basically are gonna, in collaboration with Google, have a digital, a digital presence, one can say, of the notebooks. So all the notebooks will be scanned, and there will be a possibility to have these very fragile notebooks, which could never be exhibited in a museum because one couldn't touch them. One could have them in the vitrine, but then you would only have one page open, and so that would be one example. Or Judy Chicago there was much more digital there, so maybe that's another example. Last year we did a survey of the pioneering artist, Judy Chicago, who is very experimental and is also, open to engage with new technologies. And Judy actually wanted for her show to have a new, tech collaboration with the Minty, which was a very participatory piece, and then have a augmented reality piece where visitors could create digitally with AR one of her smoke sculptures, and so in a way, yeah, we're trying to bring this into all exhibitions.
I mean, when you talk about the way that the scenography of the Gabriel Masson show, took place, where there was a kind of an installation that you could engage with that was like a physical manifestation of the game world that you were playing. That reminds me a little bit of, when Ryan Trecarton and Matthew Barney were both using these kinds of props that were emerging from their films to create not only like an exhibition setting around those films, but also like a marketplace. But what I think is so what an interesting potential rhymes with something you've said before, which is that you see that the future is mixed reality. And I wonder, how do you see mixed reality kind of taking things the next step in terms of this museum experience when you're in the museum? And how can you also see mixed reality as being a way of rethinking the idea of the museum itself and where it's situated, when it's operating? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are many examples in terms of kind of recent shows. We had a show of Sao Fei, artist based in Beijing, who was working on a video installation, and all of a sudden it led us into a sort of a kitchen type of space in the exhibition, and one could actually somehow, through a virtual reality piece, suddenly sort of time travel through the sink, into other dimensions. So there was a VR dimension, the physical dimension, or maybe another example for that is also what's happening with the pavilion. We have these architectural pavilions every summer, and it's basically over the last couple of years more also with younger emerging architects. And with these pavilions, these are of course very physical projects. It's an architectural pavilion on the lawn in front of the gallery. It's a basically tea house as well. People can have a tea or can have a coffee, but it's not at all prescriptive. It's a public space, for people to use. So a couple of years ago, we felt, it would be really interesting to kind of connect to the physical pavilion also an AR pavilion. And obviously the physical pavilion needs planning permission because, it's an architectural project that needs to go through planning. And so it's limited in that sense, the piece of land in front of the gallery. But the augmented reality commission could, of course, take place in the entire park, in Kensington Gardens, around the gallery. So we did an open call, and we had a jury, and then selected Jakob Knut-Steensen, an artist who comes actually, it's interesting because it sort of connects to our gaming conversation because Jakub, it went the other way around. It's, many artists come from the art world now and they go into gaming. Jakub comes from the world of video games and came into the art world and has created a very fascinating, environmental project with augmented reality where visitors on their phone, in a very playful way could visit this, pavilion. And obviously, there is a big possibility with this pavilion project, with mixed reality. We can have the pavilion which is physically there. We could imagine also that the past pavilions all of a sudden, could pop up, with AR. So yeah, I think it has only just begun. There is so many possibilities.
Wow. So do you imagine somebody using a headset kind of interface, walking around the pavilion and being able to switch from one pavilion to another and experiencing something like that?
Yeah, so something like that. Yeah.
So to go back to the year of video games, we've you've mentioned Daniel Braithwaite Shirley's upcoming game. Can you talk a little bit about what this game will consist of, and then also how you are going to be approaching it maybe differently than the Gabriel Masson game, based on what you learned from that project and what what new affordances uh, you're finding in as the technology evolves.
Yeah, Daniel, we've worked with Daniel. Actually, again, it's a dialogue like with Holly and Matt or with Gabriel, which evolved, over many years. We worked with Daniel on the future art ecosystems because the future art ecosystems are often basically conversations. They come out of dialogues with different participants. Then in 2022, we can't do this alone. Was basically an impro play. So it was a theater play we did. And there we could really see that Daniel's practice is very radically participatory. The audience became the actor. So I think it's of course too early to exactly describe what the game will be because, we're in the middle of the work. But that sort of radical participation, this very active participation of the visitor player is always at the very center of her installations. Because the artist, I think, really, yeah, how would I say that? Sort of highlights maybe, the role of individual choices in shaping narratives and stories and storytelling. It will be again, like with Gabriel Masson, a collaborative project with artists, technologists, interaction designers, specialist research, very much kind of, expanding the artist's kind of, game into the world in a way. It goes kind of from, the exhibition space to the park to the world, I would say.
I look back on, Marina Abramovich's survey at MoMA, the artist is present, that I think was in 2010, if I'm remembering that correctly, where that was like just an explosion in the museum world because all of a sudden there were all these lines of people who were, coming to the museum, thronging the museum, trying to get in on this kind of, intense in-person experience. And I wonder when you think we're going to see that kind of proof of concept success moment for a museum where instead of having all these physical people throng to the museum, that maybe there's something where the community around a game starts to really expand and you have all these concurrent players in a game, or you have people who are watching on Twitch or some way of manifesting success. Do you think that that's something that we can anticipate in the next couple of years?
Yeah, we hope very much that this, performance dimension will play a very big role, in Daniel Braithwaite Charlie's project. And I would say the other aspect, so there is this performative, participatory dimension, and then there is also memory. I think one thing which is really, I think, relevant in relation to discussions about technology and museums is memory. And we live in an age where we have more and more information. There is an exponential growth of information, but that does not necessarily mean that we have, more memory. Amnesia can be very much at the core of this digital age, and I think it's the role of the museum to think in a very dynamic way, not in a static way, but in a dynamic way about memory. And that's again, present in so many artists we are working with. In Daniel's practice, there is a work with archives, with fiction, and very much, thinking about how such archives can empower in Daniel's work, Black Trans Stories. So memory, I think, is a really really important part of the work as well, and the connection to archives.
I mean, speaking of archives and memory, this is obviously one of your great contributions to art history, is that for decades you have been traveling the world and talking to artists, at the end of their lives, at the beginning of their careers, really creating this oral history, almost like a rhapsode in the ancient world, preserving these stories and retelling them. Um, and that this has been such a critical part of your kind of curatorial approach. And I wonder now that there are new tools that you have available from AI, and also new tools that you have available for capturing these kinds of stories, um, how you're thinking about using AI as a 10x curator, which I think indisputably you are.
Yeah, I think it goes kind of back to, yeah, thank you. It's a really interesting question. It's basically thinking about how we can use, I mean, something Polly and Matt mentioned a lot when we worked on the show is how can we use AI as a tool for, empowerment and not extraction, and I think that's what we need to think about, that how we can actually help people take more control kind of over the work. And of course, I think a lot about, my own archive also and what AI could do there, because it is, of course, a huge data set. I've got about 4,200 hours of artist conversations. About half of them are filmed, and the other half is audio. And I think a lot about, haven't yet found the solution, but what could happen with this data set, discussing it with a lot of people. So yeah, I think that's definitely something which I'm thinking about a lot these days. Yeah, what could happen with this archive? Because most of it is not online, because I've always been doing so many conversations, and the rhythm of actually doing them has been so much faster than the rhythm of actually publishing them, because there was never really the time to publish them. Also, in a way, a lot of them are offline.
It's fascinating because there's AI is kind of creating all these reorderings where the artistic process is now becoming a little bit more like a curatorial process where you ask the model to spit out a couple of versions of an image, and then you choose one, almost like a photographer chooses what natural vista to take a picture of, but it's more of a curatorial act. Um, and also, what kinds of shifts and reordering do you see happening in the way that artists work, in the way that the art system functions over this near term of like maybe the next 5 years?
I mean, it's always difficult to predict the future. As Martha Rosler says, the future flies in under the radar. But I can try, I mean, to sort of maybe not so much talk about the future, but maybe think about certain patterns, no? Patterns that connect, from which we can maybe try to, extrapolate. I mean, it's been very fascinating to listen to your amazing recordings, to your podcasts. And
Thank you.
I mean, one thing which certainly is happening is that there is a convergence, that many different things are coming together. If you think about Sam Spratt, where we see how basically how yeah, I mean, Sam Spratt, there is this piece, the Monument Game, no, which Sam describes, which Ryan Zuro, with whom we also collaborate a lot at the Serpentine, we worked with Ryan on, of course, on Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst, and also on Refik. And the Monument Game is a game, but it brings together the world of gaming and blockchain, which is also something we have in world building, in this in the book here, which you have in the background. There we have, for example, we have Sarah Freen, and Sarah Freen brings together video games and blockchain through these amazing actually NFTs, which basically disappear if you don't give them to someone else. So if there isn't generosity, they basically disappear. So we have, I think, more and more this coming together of things. I think also it's the question maybe of the Gesamtkunstwerk, which becomes interesting again, where music, literature, I think these boundaries of these different fields are becoming much, much more porous, which is another, I think, interesting challenge for institutions, because, we have institutions for technology, we have institutions for art, we have architecture museums, we have science museums, we have technology museums, we have museums for music, for literature, and, no, design museums. And what does it mean when all of a sudden practitioners, at the moment when I visit studios, make contributions to different fields? They don't fit into these boxes anymore. So we need, I think, institutions which are more, interdisciplinary, which go beyond, the fear of pooling knowledge. And there have been, of course, very interesting unrealized projects for that. Cedric Fries and John Littlewood. I've always been working a lot with Cedric. John Littlewood, she had sadly passed away, so I never met her. But through Cedric, I got a lot of information on this fun palace idea. And in the early 60s, Cedric, who is the cybernetic architect of his generation, actually somebody, it's again somebody to revisit today, in a similar way that we revisit Rebecca Allen, Rebecca Allen, who is an inspiration for you, as I know from our email exchange, for me, but is an inspiration for almost everybody we spoke about today. Is an inspiration for Daniel Braithwaite-Shirley, is an inspiration for Ian Chang, is an inspiration for Rafi Ganadol. And here we have Cedric Price, who is an architect who worked with Gordon Pask, who worked with cybernetics, and created this idea actually of an institution where all the disciplines would come together. And this was almost realized, the Fun Palace, together with John Littlewood, who is the pioneer of street theater and who wanted to make porous the inside and the outside of the institution, which is another, I think, key thing for the 21st century. I think we need to think, it's something I think a lot about, how can we actually bring also content, and how can we bring artists into society so that it's not just behind the doors of the museum or of the exhibition space, how we can actually kind of have also artists have a seat at the table where decisions are being made, bring artworks into public space, but also bring artists into companies. One of the things which is also interesting, I think, at this very moment in time, is that this old idea of, it's another toolbox, I think, Cedric Price, John Littlewood, the Fun Palace, but there is also, we spoke about EAT, about experimental art and technology by Billy Clure. There's also the amazing APG, the Artist Placement Group. And that was an initiative of John Latham and Barbara Stevini in the 60s, 70s. And they had this idea that every corporation, every government organization, every brand, every company should have an artist in residency or an artist on the board, and I think at that very moment, at that time in the 60s, 70s, was a kind of an utopia. And I think today, this is something which becomes a very concrete idea, which is very interesting. So this idea of how we can bring art, I think many artists at the moment, we can also see that quite a lot of artists right now are starting their own companies. They're starting their own, we also, you and I spoke about that, Sarah Mehoyas, who was on your show, is both an artist and an entrepreneur. Ian Chang is launching this amazing, company, educational company, one can say. It's not an art project, but it's also a real company in the world. So that's another thing, another pattern, I think, at the moment I see. And all of these are massive changes. And, institutions, I think, it's great you mentioned DIA, because that's what happened in the 60s, with that generation. And I think it's our task, and it's something we think at the Serpentine about every day, how we can basically invent an institution for the 21st century, which takes these things into account.
I think what a fascinating tour of the horizon. And I know that we're running out of time, so I just have one last question, which is going to touch on Rebecca Allen, who we've been talking about quite a bit. And she has this brilliant kind of observation, which is that for the longest time in history, the ideas were outpacing the technology, where sci-fi was envisioning something that was, potentially centuries in the distant future. But now we've come to this very unsettling moment where the technology is actually outpacing the ideas. And you've been talking about some of the roles that art can play in terms of pitching forward into the future some kinds of ideas of positive trajectories that maybe things could take. And in your writing and in your curatorial work, you have often talked about the idea of urgency. And I wonder if you could just leave us with your thoughts on what is the state of urgency? What is the urgent thing to be done in the art space today?
Yeah, I think the idea of urgency is also to go beyond the immediacy. I think what is really important now is that we can think about longer time horizons. That we can think about. I mean, Roman Kaczarnik has written two beautiful books about that. One is about how to be a good ancestor, and then the other one is about the future. And I think in a way it is about this idea of going beyond the immediacy and thinking about longue durée, as Fernand Braudel, thought. And about in order to do that, and if that, happens in art or in society, I think we need to collaborate. We need to bring things together. I think what is urgent is to create the togetherness. And I don't think at the moment, I mean, are there more ideas in engineering? Are there more ideas in technology? Are there more ideas in art? It doesn't really matter. What matters is that we bring these ideas together. And I think we can only address the big challenges of the 21st century, if we can go beyond, the fear of pooling knowledge. And I think that's what is urgent in a way, I would say.
What a spectacular way to conclude, and what a great way to kick off 2025, which will hopefully be this year of amalgamation and collective work. So thank you so much for coming on to our world, Hans. This has been incredible.
No, Andrew, thank you so much. And it's been such an exciting dialogue over the last couple of days with you. And thank you all so much for joining today. I want to say, for those of you who actually can come to see the show of Holly Hearn and Matt Dryhurst, it's until the 2nd of February. For those of you who can't come, there is a book which just came out a few days ago, which is basically for the first time bringing together the whole practice of Holly and Matt. And then there is a third possibility to interact with it, and that's of course through the amazing app Bloomberg Connects. Our chairman Mike Bloomberg has come up with this great idea of the app Bloomberg Connects, where basically many museums, not only the Serpentine, hundreds of museums are now on this app. And the idea is really that one can experience the exhibitions through the voice of the curators, through the voice of the artists. So these are the three possibilities to interact. Best would be to come and see the show, but also through the app Bloomberg Connects and through the book.
Oh, what an amazing way to end. And I can also say that Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst are going to come on this show next month. So we'll be able to look back on the exhibition as well. But thank you again, Hans. This has been really magical. I hope you have a great year.
Thank you so much. Have a great year.
Bye. And thank you,
Bye.
everybody, for coming. This has been a lot of fun. So see you next Thursday. Bye.
Thank you.